Another disappearing civilization illusion. The film concentrates on the idea that large civilization cannot vanish without trace. First, the narrator says, the Bible speaks of people who no longer exist. Are they missing? The response comes from Dr. Gabriel Barkay, a biblical archaeologist from Bar Ilan University, Israel. He suggests that while the Canaanites no longer exist, we know about them through Egyptian sources and archaeological sites. Dr. Katrina Galler of Brown University, Associate Director of the Tiberias Excavation in Israel, then tells us that the Philistines had their own material culture that can be distinguished in the archaeological remains. Finally, Dr. Yizhaz Hirschfeld, an archaeologist from the Hebrew University and director of the Tiberias Excavation in Israel, confirms that it simply is not possible for civilization to vanish without a trace, unmasking this illusion. Of course, all these experts are correct. Unlike Murphy's illusion of a disappearing culture, in the real world civilizations leave traces. The problem does not lie with what these experts say, but with the context in which their statements have been placed. Following the sleight of hand that made it appear that nothing in the New World existed during Book of Mormon times, these experts appear to be placing a final archaeological condemnation on a culture that should have left a trace and yet seems to be completely absent. This final condemnation, however, is what begs to be examined. If we begin with Barkay's statement, we find the first indication of an issue that appears in other parts of the film. Barkay speaks of Egyptian records and the presence of Canaanites in those records, which is important historical confirmation of a Canaanite people. Is there support for Jaredites and Nephites in the New World outside of the Book of Mormon? No. On that we can agree. Is this because, as the film suggests, nothing existed? No. The problem is not that no remains have survived from the right place and time, but rather that no texts have survived. Very few texts of any kind from Book of Mormon times are in existence. Even those few that date to the right time do not originate from locations that had any known correspondence with cities in the area where the Book of Mormon likely took place. Suggesting that the case of Egyptian documents should be instructive merely indicates that Barclay is familiar with the Old World but not with the New. The Jaredites do not appear in texts. The Olmec leave no texts. The New World can only envy the text-rich Old World. In spite of the lack of texts, however, the cultures did exist. Not only did the cultures exist, but members of those civilizations wrote. Evidence of early writing survives, but not texts. The problem with the New World is not that the cultures were illiterate, but that they wrote on perishable materials. The claim that different cultures leaving different types of remains is certainly true. Mesoamerican archaeologists are quite aware of this and have traced a number of different cultural complexes through time and space. The issue is not whether different peoples can be identified, but whether we are able to place familiar names to the remains of these identified peoples. Could archaeological remains distinguish between Jaredite and Nephite civilization? They might if we knew what belonged to each. Archaeologists can certainly distinguish between Olmec and Maya, which are cultures from periods and regions appropriate to the Book of Mormon. If the Jaredites followed Olmec culture and the Nephites followed Maya culture, then we have already distinguished between the two. Note the problem that Dewar discusses in attempting to find archaeological evidence of early Israel. The villages that have been excavated are characterized by U-shaped courtyard houses, the so-called four-room houses. Clustered in groups of 2 to 4, often sharing common walls, the houses have room for animal shelter and storage of provisions on the first floor, and ample space for a large extended family on the second floor. These distinctive houses have virtually no precedence in Canaan, but they would be ideal farmhouses. Harvard's Lawrence Stager has demonstrated that this unique house form and overall layout of these hill country villages correspond closely with many narratives of daily life in the period of the Judges in the books of Joshua, Judges, and Samuel, reflecting no doubt a close-knit family and clan structure and are agrarian lifestyle. In Steger's view, the single courtyard house represents the nuclear family dwelling, and the cluster of several such houses would then be the residence of the extended or multi-generation family, equivalent to the biblical or house of the father. Okay. Dewar is of course trying to find evidence of early Israel in Canaan. He finds archaeological remains that are different. How does he determine that they are early Israelite? Nothing specifically identifies them as such. They are simply forming villages. He determines that they were Israelite because they are in the right place and seem to match descriptions in the biblical text. Is finding Book of Mormon lands or cultures comparable to this kind of real-world archaeology? We can perform exactly the same kind of analysis that the Dewar and Stager did in comparing the dwelling within the text. Starting with the text, we can match the features of the text to a Mesoamerican dwelling compound, just as did Dewar and Stager. Mesoamerican dwellings were basically compounds for multiple family units. How well does this archaeological feature fit with the rare Book of Mormon descriptions of dwelling units? We find the following in Alma. For behold, he hath blessed mine house, he hath blessed me and my women and my children and my father and my kinsfolk, yea, even all my kindred hath he blessed, and the blessing of the Lord hath rested upon us according to the words which he spoke. Alma 10, verse 11. When Amulek describes Alma's blessing, he paints a picture of how Amulek perceives his kin connections. These descriptions fit general picture of Mesoamerican households. First, we have a structural division in the sentence that separates a list of kin from the generic all my kindred. The sentence progress from named sets to a generalized set of kindred, with all my kindred being the largest and most inclusive category. Among the Aztecs, there were certain penalties that could be applied to all of one's relatives. For a penalty to be assessed upon all of one's relatives, there had to be definition of what all meant, either to the fifth or the fourth generation, depending on the source. Although the Aztecs represent a different language and time, the same necessities of defining a maximum kin groups most likely would also have dictated Amulek's concepts of what all my kindred might mean. The first set of kin is more interesting. The first term Amulek uses is my house for kin-based societies. This typically is as real as it is symbolic of the family. Kin-based societies frequently live in compounds. Excellent documents allow anthropologists to visualize some Aztec households close to the time of the conquest. For the Aztecs, the family was termed Tecan Tlaca, or the people of one's house. One account from 1580 indicates that houses typically contained 6 or 7 married couples besides unmarried youth. The archaeological discovery of living areas that clearly contain multiple buildings led archaeologists to the conclusion that such an area was a family compound, which is a very common feature of the archaeological sites of the Maya area dating to the Book of Mormon time period. A simple example is the site of Salinas La Blanca, which predates the Nephites, which has examples of 2 household mounds with multiple thatched houses, one with 3 houses and one with 4. Therefore, Amulek may plausibly have lived in a typical Mesoamerican household compound. When Amulek speaks first of Alma blessing his house and then lists specific groups, we are justified in assuming that these are all people who are living in the same house, which would mean the entire dwelling area, not a single structure. In the case of Dewar and Stager, they began with an accepted text against which they matched discovered remains. In the case of the Book of Mormon, we know the remains and must then match them to the text. In both cases, we have text and dwellings, but for each, a different piece of data becomes the measuring device. Nevertheless, the comparison is the same. We have to match actual dates, geography, and features with the dates. Geography and features noted in the text. Some problem, same solution. Same problem, same solution. Compare the archaeology and the text.